Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and today I'm talking pictures with Paul Bellinger. Paul's going to ask me some questions that people have asked him to ask, that he has about Karen Mullarkey, her career, and kind of her thought process behind what she does and how she's enjoyed so much success. So Paul is your stand-in today to answer your questions, and as always, at the end of videos that you see, post your questions, and Paul will ask them to me eventually. So here we go. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ken. How's it going?
It's going well. We're
Nice.
just hanging out here in Montana.
Nice. Yeah, you've been busy with the podcast, so you've dropped a couple new ones, 3 new ones since the last time we talked. So we have a lot to talk about. Today, we'll just go over the Karen Mullarkey stuff, though. To start off with, I think I just wanted to ask you, can you just kind of give a big picture sort of overview of Karen Mullarkey, who she is, what she means to you, and what kind of job she ultimately actually did? Like we say, photo editor. She held a variety of different positions, but like, what would she do on a day-to-day basis working with photographers?
So I think of a photo editor, or in Karen's place, she was always a director of photography when I knew her, which is kind of the person in charge of the whole photo department at a magazine. So she would manage her photo editors. She would coach them, but she'd also manage her photographers, and she'd coach them as well. So her job was basically a manager slash coach. So she's trying to get the best production out of everybody on her team. And then she's also managing the magazine's look, how they source images, who they work with, not just her contract photographers, but freelance photographers she would work with around the country and around the world. And so all that was her responsibility. And then the main thing of a director of photography was kind of the go-between between the word side of the magazine and the picture side of the magazine. So she was the one who was the advocate for the pictures and using the best pictures to tell the story, which sometimes word people don't get. So she has to speak 2 languages. She has to speak pictures, and she has to speak words. So that kind of wraps, that's a lot of jobs,
Okay.
but that's what a director of photography does.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty important job. It sounds like that's a lot of stuff on her plate. Would she be involved in like actually making final selections on what pictures are going into the magazine?
Yeah, she would be so the photo editors under her would edit what their stories that the different photographers produced, and they would be responsible for showing those to the editorial committee, whoever's putting the magazine together. Karen would be in that meeting, but the final say on what pictures went in the magazine, that would be the managing editor of the magazine. So that's above the director of photography. But a smart managing editor, with a great director of photography, would leave probably 90% of those decisions, except in, really extraordinary situations, would leave most of those decisions, if they're smart, to their director of photography.
Okay, and then like you said, I mean, there would probably be times where maybe the magazine was about to go to print or whatever, and they had a particular image selected, and she might go in and say something like, I have a better option for you to consider, something like that. Like she would go in and advocate for maybe putting in a better image than one that they had already selected.
Well, she would have been involved in the selection process all the way through. It's all coming through her, whether it's from her
Okay.
photo editors. It's all coming from the photography department. She's in charge of that. So if she gets something at a late hour that she thinks is better, yeah, she's gonna uh, you know advocate. She's gonna be an advocate to get that picture in the magazine instead of the one that's already chosen.
Or like you said, at some point, the words side of the magazine may be pushing for a different kind of image, maybe a safer image, something like this, and then she might push back and really advocate for like what she thinks is the best image.
Yeah, she's basically going to be doing that every week. A good director of photography. They're working for a newspaper. They're doing that every day. They're working for a weekly magazine. They're doing that every week. It's an ongoing battle. The problem is a director of photography is under the managing editor, and so they're butting heads directly with the managing editor. So as soon as that managing editors come and go, and so as soon as that happens, uh, and the new managing editor might not keep the director of photography. The director of photography, if they push too hard constantly against the managing editor, that relationship could sour as well. So it's a political game to you got to choose your battles and when to fight them if you're the director of photography, because you're not going to win them all.
Gotcha. Yeah, like a lot of things that we've discussed, it's a balancing act between pushing too hard or knowing which battles to fight and which ones not. So can you give me like a little bit of an overview on Karen Mullarkey in your relationship with her? When you first met her, and give me like just like sort of like the 2-sentence synopsis of her level of importance in the world of photography.
Well, Karen was a huge presence in the editorial photography world. She she made her mark at several different magazines. She was, since I knew her, she was always a player, a power broker, if you will. I don't know if that's a fair term to use, but she had a lot of power. She was when I met her the first time, it was in Washington D.C. at the National Geographic does a thing each year for photographers, and that's when I first met her. And I hadn't I don't think I'd met her before then, but I didn't really know who she was, but she might have heard something, I don't know. But she was very very kind to me from the start, and we hung out a lot over that. I think it was like a 3-day event, 2-day event, whatever. That's when I first met her. Then I went in. I think I had pictures in her magazine when she was at Newsweek before I had met her. But after we hung out in D.C., I went into her office a couple times, and I always had a kind of an insider relationship with her, even when I was a contract photographer with Time Magazine, which meant I couldn't work with her, but we still had an open relationship. So very I had access to her pretty much all the
So
time.
did you like coming up as a photographer, because I mean she was obviously had several jobs before you had even really started in photography, by like 1983 when you really started. What I mean, were you aware of her right away? Did you know other photographers that she had mentored? I mean, she mentioned a lot of photographers in that previous podcast that she had sort of mentored that are the generation sort of before you. So what was that like? I mean, were you really aware of her, or did other photographers talk about her? Did they tell you, Karen told me to do this, Karen told me to do that? Was there like a flow of information from her, down to like the ground level where you were?
No, not really, because I wasn't savvy enough. Uh, I didn't really know how the editorial hierarchy worked. Um, I was savvy enough to make friends with the director of photography's secretary. So I could make friends with the secretary and then I'd have access to the director, and that was mainly at Sports Illustrated. But I wasn't savvy enough to do that with too many other places. I was kind of probably because of Sports Illustrated and Life magazine, I was kind of in that Time Life track, and Newsweek was kind of it just wasn't completely on my radar at that point, and I wouldn't have known who Karen was before then.
You wouldn't have known her from her Rolling Stone times or anything like that.
No, when I started paying attention to that kind of stuff, Karen was already at Newsweek, and Lori Tocqueville was the director of photography at Rolling Stone at that time. So I knew who Lori was, just because Rolling Stone was kind of on my radar as well.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that's it's just I did so she was doing her job as director of photography, finding out who the new young talent was, but I wasn't necessarily doing my job checking out different magazines that might have been outside of my kind of Time Life perspective.
Gotcha. And so, I mean, to sum up kind of like just overall her role and everything, um, did you have a relationship like the ones that she's describing with editors, with photo directors at Time? She mentioned things like, when the young photographer who photographed MLK after he had been shot on the balcony, he photographed him after the towel had been placed, and she kind of talked him through that, and she picked him up from the airport and took him back to the office, and the whole time was sort of babying him and really trying to be really nice. And then she mentioned before that she always asks people when they come back from war zones, on the flight back and stuff, what are they going to do next? Like she was very involved, it seemed, in her photographers' lives, not just in terms of getting the pictures, obviously, though, like that MLK story shows she was pretty ruthless about getting the pictures, but all while putting a sort of a motherly face on it for the photographer.
Well, you'd make a mistake if you thought that these directors of photography, these picture editors of her generation, couldn't play hardball. They were in to win. They were 100% there. They take no prisoners. They as far as
Yeah.
getting pictures and working with photographers, they could be strict, tough task masters. And as far as negotiating, they didn't really. They'd play honest. They'd play fair, but they played for keeps. So my connection, my person who was, I've had a few like that true kind of mother hen type of relationship, and my relationship like that was really with Bobby Baker Burrows, who Karen mentions several times in that last interview. Bobby came to Life magazine the same time Karen did, and Bobby spent her whole life working for Life. So she was there not only in the original time when Life magazine was a weekly and the biggest deal, since sliced bread, but I don't know, Life probably went through 3 or 4 monthly and weekly versions when I worked for them. And then they went through quarterly versions. They went through these, well, that's what they're doing now, is these weird kind of issue, celebrity oriented or issue oriented. They'll do a special issue on like Woodstock, 50th anniversary of Woodstock, and they'll pull from their archives, Bill Epridge or whatever. So, but Bobby was there for every one of those. So she was there. Bobby was probably at Life for 40 years, something like this, or longer. And she was the one that really took me under her wings and not that Karen didn't, but I wasn't in Karen's immediate stable. I was in the Time Life stable, and I had access to Karen. I could have called Karen up at any time and said, I got this issue. Can we talk off the record? And those kind of conversations would happen. You would have conversations with uh, people that you might actually be in competition with at times, just because you had those relationships. But for one of my closest relationships was with Bobby Baker Burrows, who passed away about a year and a half ago.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and I mean we've discussed, a little bit about photo editors and photo directors and stuff throughout the podcast on various episodes. And so I just kind of wanted to round that out a little bit in terms of it sounds like the era that you were coming up. I mean, Karen had already moved on sort of from the Time Life stuff quite a bit before that, so you didn't really have that direct professional relationship with her, but you did have similar relationships. And it sounds like at the time, all of the magazines had figures like that had sort of come up through the ranks and worked their way up to a top position of photo director, and had that sort of relationship with their photographers. And we've talked before that it's not really something that exists as much today.
Well, you look at Michelle Stevenson. She was a director of photography at Time, the same time that Karen was director of photography at Newsweek. Michelle came up completely through the ranks. She earned her way into that position. One of her youngsters that she brought up was Marianne Golan, who now is the director of photography at the Washington Post. She worked her way up as well. Karen, she worked her way up at the, they all started basically almost at the bottom rung in the photo department, and they all, Bobby started the same way, and they worked their way up through the system. And by the time they got into having some power, they knew the business inside and out from the ground up. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one thing. Like, they had the institutional knowledge. They knew the institution that they're working for from the ground up, and they had been there for a long time as well. I mean, they didn't just, appear in their photo director positions in a matter of a year or two. That they had to actually work their way up. So they had that whole institutional memory and institutional knowledge behind them. So, and so today it's more hit or miss, as far as, like you just mentioned, that at the Washington Post, there's a direct protege coming from this line that's still working today. What do you think about, you mentioned before that, the photo editor relationship today is a little bit more perilous. It's not as, they're not necessarily looking out for your best interests as much as they're looking out for their own best interests and the interests of the magazine. So you think that's different? Like Karen, I mean, even when she's talking about her students today, I mean, she has like a real invested value in looking at her photographers' pictures, telling them how to get better, things like that. Do you think that happens today?
Well, this is the thing. Karen, Michelle, Bobby, they were in there for the long haul. And so they knew that they had to build these relationships with the photographers as well as the other people around them at the magazine. So they were in there for the long haul. So they couldn't, Karen, so if I had access to Karen at any point in her career, even when I wasn't legally, technically allowed to work with her because I was under contract for a different magazine, she's planting seeds for the future. And that's what all these people did. They're in it for the long game. So they're not going to burn any bridges. They're not going to, somebody that they might need to get on the phone. I always said, I never paid for a meal, never paid for a drink, except if I was with other photographers. And then it was kind of like whoever was on assignment kind of usually picked up the bill. But if you're out with any photo editor, let alone a director of photography, they're picking up the bill. And they're not doing that because you know, they're doing that so that if they need to get a hold of you, you'll pick up the phone. They're picking
Yeah.
up the bill, so you'll pick up the phone. It might be 5 years in the future. So all that kind of that long game doesn't exist anymore.
Okay. So that gave them a different incentive, like sort of long term, to like build these relationships and do the right thing. They weren't necessarily loyal just to whatever specific job they might have. They're thinking, who knows, in the future I might work for a different magazine. I'm going to need Ken. You know, in the future I might be going back to work for Time. I'm going to need to have a good relationship with Ken.
No, exactly. And so, you know, when Karen went to Sports Illustrated, the I'd say the first photography she probably called was David Burnett, who he was in the same Time Life kind of track. He was, you know, in their stable. So now she's at Sports Illustrated, so David's available to her. And if the second person she called was probably me. So we immediately started working for Sports Illustrated a lot. And I hadn't worked for Sports Illustrated since I was, you know, in my teenage, maybe the last time I worked for them, I might have been 20 years old. And then I went into under the Time and Life type uh, of work. And so I wasn't a Sports Illustrated photographer, even though that was kind of the first magazine I ever worked for. But as soon as Karen became director of photography at Sports Illustrated, I was doing big pieces for them.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I think you were like 12 years old when you first started working for Sports Illustrated.
Well, Neil Leifer was 15 when he started working for Sports Illustrated, so he's got me beat by a couple years.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's go through some of the things that she actually mentioned in her podcast, not just talking about general background. One thing that she mentioned she quoted Dick Pollard as saying, "You don't need the caption. The pictures have to grab you. The pictures have to elicit something from you." Um, can you go into that? Has anyone ever told you that before? Did anyone ever say to you, any former editors, anything like that, that you know you don't need the captions, that the pictures just simply have to grab you? And have you ever used that skill of like trying to like she said that Dick Pollard kind of made her go through these practice tests where he'd lay out all the pictures for her and she'd have to put them in the right order and things like this. Have you ever thought about anything like that as far as uh, a, an exercise to make photographers better?
So the first thing, one of the first things I learned when I was working with an agency, Contact Press Images, was so they'd print. We're shooting slides, and so they'd have 3 lines on the top of the slide, 3 lines on the bottom of the slide, and maybe 1 line on either side of the slide if they really, you know, pushed it. And so these 3 lines, each line had like 21 characters, and it was just they put them in a machine that actually printed out whatever. So it, and there was a
Mhm.
format, there was a style that would say like Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Okay, okay.
Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
So real quick, so like, is this? I notice on um, I notice on an Instagram account. I think it's Morris's Instagram account. He posts like pictures of that with the little slide, and it'll be printed on the bottom, Black Star, Christopher Morris, Haiti, whatever, 1981, whatever it is. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. So what the first thing, you know, we'd use the Black Star was the floor below us on 27th Street, you know, right off of Park Avenue, and so we we both use the same machine. Before that, you'd all have to use actual ink stamps, and that was even less information. So the first thing you'd have is you'd have your time code, your location, and that then you'd have 2 lines with like 20, 25 characters at the most to print your
Okay.
caption information. And then the bottom part of the slide would be your credit and the agency credit. So and those slides would go out like that, and that was basically it. So what I learned 2 things from that. One, I just, you know, I would go to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and I would ship film back in the night on the airplane, and my caption envelope would read Port-au-Prince, Haiti. That's it. 5
Yeah.
rolls, 10 rolls, whatever. Um, I didn't want to give huge captions. I wasn't from the Life magazine, Alfred Eisenstadt, who took note reams of captions. The Carl Maidens would write a book for his captions. These guys took huge captions. I didn't do any of that because what I realized, not only was it not going to go on the slide, um, it wasn't helpful, because if I would say, and people would write very detailed captions on the film envelopes, they'd write very detailed captions that would say, look for roll number 3. I got into a situation I think really worked out, and it was halfway through the roll, and things like this. They get very precise, very detailed in their captions. And what that did, not so much with the agency editors, but with the magazine editors, it's kind of like the same thing about, spoiler alert. You don't want, you haven't seen the film. You don't know what's good and what's bad. You don't want to taint somebody's preconceived idea of what's good and bad on those rolls you're shipping. So I wanted them to find the good pictures themselves. That's their job. And they're going to have a better idea of what the good pictures are than I'm going to have, even if I was there sitting next to them editing at the same time. They've got a more sophisticated eye at this point, and it's really hard to edit your own material. So as far as captions, I thought that those would work against me for those 2 reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I if you go back, I got boxes full of old film caption envelopes that are basically worthless. Will give me no insight into the film.
So are you wishing you had those
Not
just right
really,
now
not really.
in
I
hindsight?
mean, no. It's still, I mean, like I said, you can go into Izzy's archives and he'll have uh, everything will be very detailed, and he'll be able to, or his whoever's archiving his work. Bobby was his archive. Bobby was his took care of his work, and now it's probably, I don't know where it is, but you could what is that all is meaningless. I don't need to know, oh, this is a puppet show in Paris, France. Or actually, that's all I need to know. Puppet show, Paris, France, 1946.
Mm-hmm.
That I probably have on my envelope. Anything more than that is just like frosting that photographers use to convince editors that this is actually a good picture, and a good editor never falls for that anyways.
That's awesome. Yeah. So getting back to her quote, she was talking about this in the context of, trying to lay out a story as an editor, and basically saying, well, can I at least have the caption so I can know what the story is about and what the thing is about? And instead, she said, no, the pictures just have to grab you. The pictures have to elicit something without reading the captions. What do you think about that?
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, I've worked as a creative director, and when I'm looking for photographers, and I don't know if it came out of like Bowling Green, or I don't know where this came out of, but all these Midwest photographers, and it's spread out across the country. All these younger photographers have exactly the same websites with exactly the same template, where you can see that they spent a lot of time on their captions. And I don't care about the captions. I'm there to see if you can shoot pictures of what, if I'm looking at your website. But they had these teachers that,
Yeah.
stress the importance of writing captions. And, it started probably in Missouri in the journalism school there, but none of that has anything to do with the quality of your work. If your pictures need captions, then your pictures probably aren't any good. And that's, that's, heresy. The other thing is, except if you're working in Washington, D.C., if you need a press pass, you need a credential, you probably shouldn't be there either. So captions, press credential, if those are your crutch, then, throw them away, Tiny Tim, because this is the real world. You're here to make pictures, not excuses, not tell, elaborate stories about why this is a good picture. Your picture has to be a good picture. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, that's funny. I didn't know you had such strong views on captions, but I
I
could
hate,
have
I
guessed.
hate,
You know,
I hate, I hate captions. I mean,
we've never. It's funny. We've never discussed captions once, and it's pretty
now you know
funny.
why.
If someone would have asked me, I would have said, I think he's adamantly opposed to captions. He doesn't seem like a caption kind of guy to me. But I know that anytime I've been working with people that are doing these long and lengthy captions, I'm always out shooting still. So like if I'm shooting a football game, I go back into the photographer's workroom. They're all in there writing captions and stuff. I'm still outside shooting. So to me, it always seemed kind of just like a huge annoyance.
Well, like if you're shooting sports, right? You're shooting that Nebraska game, and Nebraska starts out the AP in number 24th in the country in the AP poll, which is something they haven't done for quite some time, which is nothing to celebrate. We don't celebrate being the 24th best in the state of
In
Nebraska.
Nebraska.
And we don't celebrate being the 24th best photographer at the football game either. Okay, so if you're writing captions, if you're taking time writing captions, something that Photo Mechanic will practically do automatically for you, then
Yeah.
something's wrong. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
I need to know the name of the player, the team. Photo Mechanic will plug that in for me. Need to know the other player on the other team. I need to know what quarter it was in. Maybe if it's a first down, maybe, I don't really need to know that. Little bit of information, who won the game. That's like one sentence. That's my
Yeah.
football caption. A, B, and C. That's what
Gotcha.
writers are for, to fill in the rest of that.
Hmm. And even that much information, I think it would depend on who you're working for. If you would even need to know the exact player in the quarter or anything like that.
The worst case scenario, I'm going to go to Getty Images because those poor hacks have already stamped out their captions and moved their pictures, or USA Today Sports or whatever that's called now. And I'm going to lift
Yeah.
their captions there. Why would I write my own captions when some poor schmuck's already done it for me?
Yeah. And like you said, Photo Mechanic, I think there's a paid subscription thing that you can get that essentially you type in a couple things and it spits out the whole caption for you.
Let me tell you, I'll give you a real world story about maybe 10 years ago. We Contact Press Images did a big Olympic, a big museum show of all our Olympic work. And this is like probably from 20 Olympic games. And so say the Olympics, I never wrote a caption in the Olympics. I'd say, whatever, USA versus Venezuela, soccer,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So the person, our our director in Paris went through, and just by using online sources, she captioned every image of mine in the entire museum show. And not only
Wow.
she only had one problem with one image, and it was the women's 5,000 meter, and she couldn't tell the difference between two women running in this event, where they happened to be from the same country and they were identical twins. So that's the one problem she ran into.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. That sounds like an awesome workflow. Uh, Basically, just putting in your file name or a keyword, soccer, Olympics, 2018, and then letting your editor do the rest.
Well, they're sitting,
At that
they got to do something, right?
Well, also at that time, I mean, to think about shooting the Olympics, I think that's a really good example where, you know, you're shooting all day for long periods of time. You're traveling around to the different venues. There's always something to shoot. You told me that before, that there's always something else that you could be shooting when the Olympics are going on. And so to be even spending time the night before, staying up an extra 15 minutes to type out a pre-caption or something like that is kind of wasted time. I mean, it's going to affect your performance, So I could see how in a situation like that, it would be critical that, you didn't waste time on things like that.
No,
like doing
my
captions?
job's to make pictures and let other people figure that stuff out. The last Olympics I shot was 2008, so it's quite a while ago in Beijing. Only 2 times did I call up, and we had an editorial team in Beijing. Twice I called up and said, you need to look at this event. One was with Michael Phelps, and it was just, I think it was his 7th or 8th gold medal, and he hugs his mom, and I got into the position I needed to be, and I knew it was a good picture that would have hugging his mom after his 8th gold medal, breaking the all-time world record of Mark Spitz, whatever it was, I don't remember. And the other one was with Usain Bolt. This is after the 100-meter, and I put myself out of position on purpose, and he came and he collapsed right in front of me and celebrated and all that kind of stuff. And so all the pool photographers, the photographers shooting the finish line were all out of position, and he's laying flat on his back on the track with the whole stadium behind him. And I called up and said, you got to look at this frame. So that's twice. Besides, and that was kind of, an important heads up. I wasn't politicking for like, oh, look at my picture, that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that's interesting. That's a good segue because my next question was when Karen was talking about Annie, she mentioned that Annie Leibovitz helped her see differently. And she specifically mentioned that kind of one thing that she learned from Annie was that she learned that she liked photographers. She wanted to find photographers who didn't like standing in line, who had their own vision and their own voice. And in a way, that Usain Bolt story that you're talking about is kind of exactly why Karen would send someone like you to go shoot in Olympic Games, because you're not going to stand in line. You're going to be out of position. You're going to intentionally go somewhere else. You have your own voice. It's not just something that you're trying to be different. It's that you have a vision for what you want, and it's different from what everyone else wants, and that's what she likes it.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the Olympics. We'll just stick on the Olympics for an example. My first Olympics, Time Magazine, the deputy director of photography was Michelle Stevenson at that time. She made the trip to Seoul. Probably 2 other editors made the trip to Seoul. Bobby was working out of the same office for life. And there were probably 2 technicians and 2 kind of picture researchers. So they probably had 8 or 9 people working out of an office. They had Ken Regan and Neil Leifer were shooting for Time. They had TV credentials, which were the go anywhere, do anything credential. So, and they'd shoot about 100 rolls a day each. The Burnett was shooting for Life. Jose Azel, I think Jose was there. Delete Meta, I think I was there. So there was 3 other contact photographers working out of that office. And then on top of all that, Time Magazine had probably 8 other photographers in the office. So there were probably about 12 photographers on assignment for one Olympics for Time Magazine alone. Add the photographers in who picked up days or were already there and picked up a day here and now there from Time. They probably had 20 to 22 photographers film they were editing. Arnold Drapkin, the director of photography, was there, now that I remember it. So Arnold was there. His deputy, Michelle, was there before she became director of photography. So there's this huge team, okay? And the point is that everything was, how am I going to compete with Neil Leifer or Ken Regan? They can go on the track with FloJo whenever they want, after the race. Those guys ran more laps backwards, victory laps with with winners running around the track than you know, probably anybody else in the stadium. So what am I there for if I'm not there to shoot something different or better or anything? I mean, I don't have a reason to be there. I was the so actually I wasn't going to the Olympics, and Jose dropped out for some reason, and my agent Bob Pledge convinced Time to just put me on, just because have another contact photographer in the crew, and we lost this one photographer. So I was like the last one added to the team. So I don't have any reason to be there unless I'm shooting something better or different or just in the wrong position. Everybody else is going to be in the right position. So, and
Exactly.
I ended up getting my first time cover out of that Olympics. So, that kind of goes to show you that um, it's not it's not always great to be in the at the finish line with 150 other photographers.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, just getting into this idea of like of an editor, legendary editor like Karen Mullarkey saying that what she's looking for are people who see differently and who don't want to stand in line. Like we talked about that with David Buto. You guys had a whole thing where for a PFJ there are no lines, right?
There are no
And so
lines, and when
so
you mentioned Karen, okay, so you mentioned Karen. Now that you're bringing all this up, Karen was there at that Olympics. She was the director of photography for Newsweek, and so she was my direct competition. But I would go out any chance I could, anytime we had some free time. I would be out with Bobby and Karen, getting a meal or whatever, um,
letting them buy you a meal.
letting them buy me a meal. Exactly.
And in return they just got like some nice eye candy to look at. Okay, I see how the nickname really stuck for you. So anyway, okay. Um so get it keep I want to keep harping on this idea because people that are starting out or people that are looking to improve themselves as a photographer, I think this some of the really important things that Karen mentioned were, things like I need a photographer that's not going to stand in line, that's going to go somewhere else, that's going to see things differently. Like she mentioned specifically that Annie had just a completely different way of looking at people than anyone else. And that was like the big take home lesson that she took from Annie, was that she could just, she saw things differently. And that was when she was probably realizing that, how a photographer sees something is really, really important.
Well, if you look at the she came out of the Life magazine model, and if you think about that, Life magazine was in the catbird seat. They could, if they sent a photographer someplace, um, they they could go pretty. They could get the prime position. They could always be wherever. Not always, but they'd have a good chance of getting a position that was kind of exclusive or ideally what they wanted. Um, and so they were kind of, so it's a double-edged sword. So if you've got that prime position, you got to shoot from it.
Yeah.
And so if everybody's, you know, if all your shooters are shooting from the prime position, that's what opens the door for people like the contact press image photographers who are going to be shooting something maybe further away, maybe completely out of position, maybe a different type of film, whatever it is. But they're they have to, because they don't have any choice. That's the only way they're going to get any ink. And if you don't get paid
Hmm.
if you don't get ink.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so as far as more sort of like tips and nuggets taken from Karen, One thing that she's mentioned before, you interviewed her previously for an article that I think is somewhere on your website or on your blog, and I always had these quotes, and she said it again in the podcast. I've always had these quotes like in my head is that, great photographers are like children. They're always curious, and I just wanted you to talk about that quote right there and like what that means to you.
The scary thing, and I didn't realize this until I talked to Karen on that video, last week. Um, I didn't my way of operating, a lot of it was never thought out or verbalized. And what she's talking about, I'm just, yeah, that's how you do it. So I don't know when that became part of, or how it became part of my operating procedure, standard operating procedure, the things that she was talking about. But it did, and maybe that's what came out of going for a beer with Bobby and Karen in Seoul. Uh, it just becomes ingrained in your way of thinking, and that's why we're doing these long form interviews on this talking pictures, because you don't know where that knowledge actually comes from. It's not, it's not the clickbait where it's the five best ways to become an overnight success in photography. That those don't work. Or it comes over time, and you don't just learn it once. You learn it 20 times. And after you learn it 20 times, after you learn that lesson 20 times, then it's just something that you always do. That's how it's like training a horse. You want to talk about children, photographers are like training a horse. You
Mm-hmm.
learn what you do when you train a horse is you want to make doing the right thing easy for the horse to do. So the horse learns that doing it right is actually easier than doing it wrong. So as a photographer, doing it right is easier, and it gives me more success.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, this idea too of always being curious. I know with you, that's something that you've always emphasized is sort of like having this childlike curiosity that you can always sort of like look at something from, like a kid when they see something, they look at it from one angle and then they walk around to the other, they see it from behind, they look, and I think that that's something I mean, I meet a lot of working photographers that don't seem to have almost any curiosity
That's the
and
wor-
and
the
I
worst. That's the worst. That's why we name the magazine Curious. That's why
yeah,
it's that's why everything starts with curiosity. And it could be when you see a photographer and they've got this like attitude, oh, I got this, I've done this a million times, I know exactly what to do here, and yada yada.
yeah,
That's just the worst. It's just the worst. And you're just like, okay, I know whose feed after this event I don't need to look at.
yeah,
um, if you're not curious, you got no reason being there, unless you're a wire photographer and you have to make the picture of record. Then you're kind of hobbled in that way, speaking of horses.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, just these are two major things of like that we've already discussed before on this podcast. But I think if any photographer out there is sort of struggling, I do think that embracing your unique vision and running with it, and then also being more curious, like you have to embrace curiosity, I think, and that's not something that you can just like flip a switch and be like, oh, today I'm going to be more curious. But you have to find a way to spark your curiosity, whether it's trying to learn something new, whether it's like trying to get books, looking at magazines. Like for me, when I got a subscription to a bunch of different magazines, and when they come, I start flipping through the pages, I start seeing stuff, and my mind starts racing of ideas coming out of me, whenever I look at books, like if I go back and I read like an autobiography of a photographer, like I recently reread this Helmut Newton autobiography, and it's just it's inspiring. It makes you, so you have to have some level of curiosity about your craft. I mean, it doesn't always have to be a find new to look at as far as to shoot, Like maybe, I'm not feeling very, very motivated. So let me go, to an old car show or something and shoot some pictures. Maybe that'll spark the curiosity. But I think it's something like looking for it outside of just new subjects to shoot. It's also learning about your craft. You should be curious about your own craft. Who came before? Like you should want to listen to a 3-hour talk with Karen Mullarkey to hear just all the little tidbits and all the little stories that she told, those kind of things. And I think if you don't have that, then, you really gotta find it. And I know that's not as easy as just flipping a switch, but you're going to struggle if you don't have that.
I mean, how much do you earn an hour? Let's say you pencil it out and you earn $100 an hour, and you're sitting around and you're like, how am I going to be a better photographer today? And you're like, I need that lens. I need that new body. That new body's $3,000. You could watch this video of Karen Mullarkey, and it's a long video. It's 3 hours, but that's going to help you more than any new body, any new piece of glass, any new piece of
Yep.
software, and it's free. So
Exactly.
if you don't have that curiosity, there's not a whole lot I can do to help you. But if you do have that curiosity, this stuff's out there. These people have, like you said earlier, they have the institutional knowledge that is quickly disappearing today, and
Exactly.
they're willing to share it, and it's free. Spend the
Yeah.
time, invest
Yeah. I mean,
invest in your own knowledge base.
exactly. I mean, that 3 hours with Karen Mullarkey is like, I mean, you could take a semester of college. You're not going to learn as much as you will learn from that 3 hours. And I can't wait to get her back on because I know there's so much more stuff that you can talk to her about. So, okay, I want to keep going through this. I know you're going to have to go here pretty soon. So I want to get through a couple of other major points that she hit on that I just want to reemphasize. One, she mentioned, and this is something that you and I have discussed many times before, is one of the most important skills that a photographer can have beyond the curiosity and their own vision, the two big things that we already hit on, is being able to talk with any kind of person. And she specifically says it's like the art of making people feel comfortable, that it's a form of seduction, and you and I have discussed this before too, a lot about a PFJ should be able to have a conversation with someone from a blue state or a red state, should be able to have a conversation with the CEO or with a plumber, any walk of life. A PFJ should be able to interact and make them feel at ease. What do you think about that?
No, it's 100% true, and it's and you can tell right away the people that can't. And I don't really like. I don't know if like is the right word.
You're not a people person, okay?
Well, I'm not good at talking to people, but when I got a camera in my hand, uh, actually, I mean, I'm really good at talking to people, but it doesn't come easy to me. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't come easy to me. And when I first started my career, and I'll never forget this because, I'd assist photographers all the time. And I was assisting David Burnett, and we were shooting a picture of Lee Iacocca in what was used to be known as the Pan Am building. So, and I was standing outside of Newsweek, and he was at the Time Life building having lunch with Arnold, and he was shooting this portrait of Lee Iacocca for Forbes magazine, and I was the assistant. So I had the light, one light, right? He had a white lightning. This is when white lightning first came out, and it was just this can with this strobe in it and a cheap light stand, right? And so I'm waiting. I don't know why I was waiting outside the offices at Newsweek, but it's kind of if you go down, 50th Street, take a right, then you'd be on your way to the Pan Am building, and from the Time Life building, and Newsweek was kind of right on the way. So I'm sitting there waiting for him, and we're supposed to be there, say at like 1. And it's 1:05, it's 1:10, it's 1:15. I'm waiting. This is before cell phones. I'm just standing outside, tapping my feet. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? This is going to be a train wreck. And Burnett comes running by, and he's like, lunch went late with Arnold Drapkin from Time. And he's got this leather jacket. We both got our leather jackets on. People used to joke it was like the Bob Pledge used to issue leather jackets to all the contact press image photographers. It was like our look, right? We were like, the
The punks.
punks, the bad boys, whatever. And so he's in his leather jacket, I'm in my leather jacket, and we have, I don't know, Pan Am building's probably like 8 blocks from there. So we're running down Park Avenue, going to the Pan Am building. Everybody knows that's the one with the Park Avenue goes through the building. It's a famous building. Everybody knows it. And we run up, it's like on the 15th floor, 20th floor, whatever. We get into this, and the secretary brings us into a conference room. And Burnett looks around the conference room, and Iacocca's going to be there in like 2 minutes because we're running so far behind. I don't know if we kept Lee Iacocca waiting or not, but he's going to be there in like 2 minutes. And so Burnett's like, okay, here's a picture here, here's a picture here. Set up that white lightning and put it here. And when Iacocca's here, keep it there. But when he moves over here, move it right here. I'm like, okay. And that gave us like 3 shots, only having to move the light once. And we're going to have less than 5 minutes with this guy. I mean, Lee Iacocca was kind of a big deal. He just passed away recently. And I saw these pictures, when he passed away again. And so he was shooting color for the Forbes magazine. And he had 1 body, 1 lens, 1 roll of film. And then he had kind of some weird camera. I don't know what it was. It's probably 4x5 or something. It could have been I don't know. But that was his black and white camera. So he's going to shoot the color stuff for Forbes, and that was pretty serious. And he's going to shoot the black and white for himself, just, to keep pushing the bar, right? To keep raising the bar. And so Iacocca comes in, and this I don't even know how they got this conference room table in the building, right? It's like 30 feet long. And one of Burnett's shots is shooting down the length of the conference table. And it's this glossy, probably like, I don't know, it's like probably $100,000 table. It's just beautiful wood. It's just 40 foot long. And so he puts Iacocca sitting on the edge of the table at the end, and Burnett gets down at the other end of the table, and he's working the reflection in this table, right?
Yeah.
And at some point and Iacocca, I don't know if we made him wait or not, but he's already kind of like, he's a busy guy anyways. And he's kind of like already ready to be out of there. And we haven't shot the first picture yet. And Burnett's like, man, when I was a kid, I would have made paper airplanes, and this table right here would have been my aircraft carrier, and I'd be landing paper. And I'm like, I'm laughing. I'm just thinking, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
And Iacocca like just like said, oh, really, like didn't impress him at all. But we got the 3 other shots out of the room. So we had our 5 minutes. Maybe that helped. Maybe it didn't. But Burnett went for it, and he got, a little bit of grace out of Iacocca by telling a stupid story. And so then there's like 2 lessons you learn, right? It's like, you got to be able to talk to people. You got to be like ready to perform. And Burnett we were sweating. We'd run like almost a mile. His glasses were steaming up. And we got into the room like 2 minutes before Iacocca. And so he made this 3 pictures. He shot them in color and black and white. I had 1 roll of film. I took that to the lab myself. I had to wait for it, then bring it to Forbes. It was like on deadline. And so Alex was the editor at Forbes, and I brought it into her, and I went into her office, and she edited it right in front of me. And she's like, I can use every frame on this roll. Every frame is perfect. And here's my cover, here's my opening spread, and here's my second spread.
Wow.
She didn't know about the black and white. She never probably saw the black and white, but it was a cover and 2 spreads from our 4.5, 5-minute shoot with Iacocca. He shot 3 different scenes in color and black and white. I moved the light once, and and we did take light readings. I remember taking light readings, but besides that, that was just like, you're looking at Ty Cobb, in his prime is what you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't remember exactly what your question was. So that little bit of grace period by telling a stupid story teaches you two things. One, you got to personalize it. You got to make that personal connection, even if you don't think you're making a personal connection. You have just enough, right? And the other thing, as a photographer, don't be afraid to look like a goofball.
Oh
You're
yeah.
going to look silly as you're making pictures. You always do. And if you're afraid about how you look and how cool you look, then that's gonna
Oh yeah.
make your pictures worse. And so here it is, Burnett. He's sweating. His glasses are steamed up. He's still got his leather jacket on. We've got this stupid. It was like a $200 light can, is what it was, on a $20 light stand.
A light can. I love it.
And that's, we're shooting one of the most powerful businessmen, leaders of industry, invented the Mustang of all things. I mean, this is like a big deal. There was no craft services. There was no makeup person. It was just like, boom, bang, bing, here you go.
It wasn't glamorous. It was just a guy who knew how to get what he wanted. He was a master of his craft. He absolutely was a master of the lighting and the technical side of things. All he had to do was find a way to get an extra 2 minutes out of him so he could finish the shoot. And I mean, I love that. I love that. Like, you're over here because I think you've probably been on a set with me before where you're standing somewhere in the background, rolling your eyes, going, "What is this guy saying to the person?" Like you're saying some really dumb thing about paper planes and stuff like that. I mean, that happens to me all the time because I'm definitely one of these people that talks a lot while I'm shooting. Um, and it's good to know that even the best say dumb things, and just if you get a smile, or even if you don't get a smile, if you just sort of could warm up the situation by 1 degree, you get an extra minute. So
Well, yeah, I don't think Burnett thought. I thought he was the reason it worked is because he was completely sincere. He
yeah.
was totally. He wanted to be a pilot. He studied math in college. And
Yeah.
he was an aviation engineer, something like this. And that's what he would have done with that table. Probably, if we would have been there 30 minutes waiting for Iacocca, there would have been a bunch of paper airplanes around that room.
Exactly. So it kind of goes back to that embracing your true self too. I mean, if something comes out of your mouth, I mean, you it's not like a rehearsed line or a line that I use that always elicits a certain response from a person. It's just just my true self. Whatever comes out, it's all honest and true and authentic. And so you're right. I think that's probably what he related to more than anything was like, look at this goofball. He's sweating, his glasses are fogged up, he's talking about paper planes. Like, okay, let's cut him a break and give him an extra minute. Or maybe you turn a blank face into a tiny bit of a smirk. you know
Well, that's the thing. I mean, think of it from Iacocca's perspective. They told his PR person, this is Forbes magazine, Forbes and Fortune were the big business magazines. They're like, we're sending David Burnett. He's the best in the business. And Iacocca's PR person, okay, Lee can only spend 5 minutes, whether, whatever. And so then you get like this, it's almost like a street performance when you're watching Burnett work. And it's completely professional, but it's all honest. It's all about curiosity. And he's all in at 100%. And
hmm
if you want your clickbait, that's your three things right there. Be
yeah.
curious, be all in. I don't know. What's the third
Be
one?
yourself.
Be yourself. Don't worry about looking like an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I got one more thing. You should talk about that story, that Iacocca story again, whenever you get David Burnett on the podcast, um, and see what his take on it. But yeah, I mean, I was just thinking when you were just mentioning that, Iacocca's thinking, hey man, they said they're gonna send the best in the business, and then these two sweaty guys in leather coats show up with one light on a stick. It looks like a freaking light can, and they're like, they're all sweaty. They're saying this goofball stuff, so I could just imagine he's probably like, wow, what is the state of the photography industry if this is the best in the business? But
No, can
anyway,
you imagine? I mean, yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So bring that up with David Burnett. That'll be interesting to hear. One last thing from Karen. I don't know how much more time you have, but she mentioned something at the end, and I think it's something that was also in the article. So I recommend that anyone who hasn't read that article, it's an interview with Karen Mullarkey. I think it's titled something like "From Mad Men Secretary to Time Editor" or something. She mentioned that you only learn from mistakes. You don't learn from your successes, that you only learn from your mistakes. And it goes back into some things that we've talked about a lot of times before, personally and on the podcast, about the differences between shooting on film oftentimes and shooting on digital, that you don't see your mistakes when you shoot digital, that you delete off. Some people delete as they shoot. They might delete off bad images, out of focus pictures, things like this. It comes back to this idea of looking at your camera while you're shooting, chimping, which what did she call it?
I don't
She was
remember.
bobbing her head like a duck or something. She said, I
Yeah,
never want to see photographers that are like bobbing their head like a duck when they're going like this,
Yeah, I mean, and that's interesting because Karen and I've never had that conversation about chimping, and she didn't use the word chimping. She had her own phrase for it.
Yeah.
And it's one of my major pet peeves, and I preach against it. I beg people not to do it, and you see them doing it. I see them on TV, and I'm just like, what is wrong with you? You're watching a basketball game, you're watching a football game, and you're just like, what is wrong with you? And Karen, because my point is it's taking you out of the game. If you're doing a portrait session with somebody, you're turning that person into a product immediately. Your subject is now just a product on the back of your camera that's going to work for your Photoshop needs, whatever. So you're not dealing with a person anymore. You're dealing now with just a two-dimensional representation of that person. That takes that connection away. So that's number one that's bad about chimping. Number two is whatever you're looking at the back of your camera can't change the picture that you made. It's done. It's in the can. It's done. Mm-hmm. But when you're looking at that, you're missing something that might make a picture someplace else. It could be on the field of play. It could be behind you. It could be a little trait that you see somebody do. And you see them do that in the huddle, say. We're using the football analogy. You see a player do something in the huddle that's interesting. Well, now the next time he goes into the huddle, you can be prepared for that and make that picture.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at there is really like a lot of people will say, oh, nothing's going on in the game right now, so it's okay if I chimp and look at my camera. But what you're saying is that even if you weren't going to be making a picture during that time, you might be seeing something else that you notice that will help you make a better picture on the next play or at the next game or whatever it may be later on down the line.
Right. And but what she added to it, that to take yourself out of reality and into the back of your camera, it takes 45 seconds to recover from that. So your brain, to get it back focused, for lack of a better word, on what you're actually shooting and not what you've just shot, that's a 45-second procedure. And if you're always chimping, you're always you're never in that reality of what you're photographing. I see people do that. I know they're not in the moment. I know they're missing it. Could you imagine chipping in front of Lee Iacocca? He'd be like, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want to know what's going to be on your Instagram feed.
Good.
So exactly. That's, chimping is the worst. And the interesting part about that, when you asked earlier about philosophies and how those developed, Karen and I have never had a discussion about chimping that I remember, but we're both on the same page, having whatever I learned from her, whatever we learned from the industry, from other giants in the industry, we ended up in the same position about chimping. It's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it seems like we're constantly running across people that sort of want to defend it. And it's like, there really is no defense for it. We've seen now from two industry titans here that it's universally considered bad. So people need to get that idea out of their head that there's any excuse for it. But also on this topic of that you only learn from your mistakes. I mean, this is something that she mentioned in the content is a little bit of like, now that you have the chance to look at your pictures right away and delete them right away, you're not going to learn from your mistakes as you would in the past where you had to hand in all your film, and the editor is going to see all your bad work as well as hand over just your selects like you would in the digital age.
Well, we'll talk about this. So the air conditioning just started. So we'll wrap this up, and hopefully the sound won't be too bad. But so we'll talk about that idea. When you look at this last video where I edit and tone a bunch of frames, we can you can see in my edit that there's all sorts of bad frames that immediately should have, they have no place to go. They're just kind of there, but you never delete them. You just never delete them. You got to look at them. You got to ingest them, not only to your computer, but you got to ingest them into your mind because you're still learning. And what's the point of like making pictures if you're deleting them all the time? You're basically killing that curiosity, because what you're saying is, oh, I wonder, like what's his face, Gary Winogrand, the art of photography is seeing what things look like when they're photographed. That's what you're doing when you're shooting pictures. You're like, oh, I wonder if those carnival lights are going to make a good picture. Yeah, they probably won't, but I'm curious enough to at least give it a go. So if you shoot that picture and you're like, then you chimp it, then you're like, oh no, that sucks, and you delete it. One, like you said, you've learned nothing. Two, you're really kind of doing something that's going to eventually kill that spirit of curiosity that's really fueling your creativity.
Yeah, partially, like you said, I do think when you chimp, you are also, interrupting your curious pursuit of images in front of you. So you are, instead of looking at it and seeing, is that interesting? You should have worked it. You should have shot it from different angles. Should have looked at it from one side and the other side, all that kind of thing. That's where you kill your curiosity by then you look at it on the back of the camera and you're like, oh, it looks kind of stupid as a picture. So, you just say, forget it. Let me go.
There's the other side of that too, because when you see people doing this in their YouTube videos, they're like, they shoot a picture, they look at it, they show it to the model, and they're like, oh, we got it. Let's go on.
Yeah.
I don't know that you got it. You work that until you don't have any other place to go, and then you move on. That's how you work a scene.
Exactly. All right, well, I'm going to let you go. I know you got stuff to go get off to. Next time, we're going to get Karen back on this, right? I mean, you got to get a lot more out of her. It's hard to go over 3 hours of stuff in one podcast, but we definitely need to talk to her more. I want to see those stacks from the family shoot with Richard Avedon. So we got to ask her to show those to us in the future. We can talk. She dropped a lot of nuggets about Richard Avedon in the way that he shoots, the way he interacts with people, the way he wanted his pictures laid out, that kind of stuff. We can go over that next time as well. So there's a lot still to talk about, but people should go back and re-listen to the Karen Mullarkey podcast over and over again.
Well, let me just get this. This will be our book, this episode. This is this Rolling Stone book that came out. I don't know when it came out. Laura Tocqueville was the editor at the time, so she edited this book, but a lot of the pictures in here were made under Karen's watch. A lot of Annie's earlier work where it's kind of documentary work, and then you see that transition to where Annie kind of learns how to shoot color for Rolling Stone magazine, which she was the photographer when Rolling Stone went from black and white to color. So this is the book. We'll, like always, hopefully this is pretty cheap on the internet now, and you can get it for cheap, but it's building a library so that you have these examples to pull from in your own way. That's how you develop your eye, your own eye.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I say it all the time, like photographers got to put their money where their mouth is. You know, it's not that expensive to find a used bookstore. When I travel, because, you know, I'm in Boise, Idaho, you're in Billings, Montana. We don't have like amazing used bookstores with tons of stuff. But anytime I go into a bigger city, I always hit up the used bookstores and just buy as many books as I can. You know, there are things called libraries where you can go and look at these type of things for free. Sometimes they have good photography collections, you know, so definitely go look at books. Find someone, make a friend that has photography books, you know.
Well, thanks, Paul. We'll talk later this week. We got a couple more interviews. Actually, one with David Burnett coming up soon, and another with the guy who made that picture of Muhammad Ali. That's right over your left shoulder.
This one, this picture right here. So Scott Goldsmith.
Yep. So we're going to talk to Scott Goldsmith and David Burnett, and hopefully we'll learn something. We'll get to be a little bit better by talking to these folks.
Absolutely, man. All right. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.